I still remember the sound of the waves that morning, calm, repetitive, almost cruel in their indifference. They didn't care that I was about to break my mother's heart. I stood in the kitchen doorway, the smell of salt and coffee blending in the air, watching her hum softly while folding napkins. The sunlight poured through the old lace curtains, dust particles floating like memories suspended in time. My hands were trembling, and I didn't know if it was from the cold or from guilt. "Mom," I said softly. She looked up, smiling that tired, fragile smile she wore these days, the one that pretended everything was fine. "Morning, sweetheart, you look pale, didn't sleep." I forced a smile, barely. The words stuck to my tongue like ash, but I said them anyway. "We're going tomorrow, Mom. I've sold your beach house." For a second, everything froze. The waves, the light, the air, even her hands stopped mid-motion, holding a folded napkin as if she didn't understand what I'd just said. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Then she blinked once, twice, and whispered, "You sold it." I nodded, unable to meet her eyes. Silence, the kind that crushes you from the inside. She didn't shout, she didn't ask why. She just lowered her gaze, placed the napkin on the table, and whispered, "I see." That was it, 2 words. But they carried a lifetime of memories, birthdays, summer storms, laughter, my father's voice echoing through the hallway. And now, I had just erased all of it with one sentence. I wanted her to yell, to call me heartless, to say something that could justify the pain I was feeling. But she didn't. She simply walked to the window, her frail fingers resting on the wooden frame, eyes fixed on the ocean beyond. "This house, your father built it with his own hands," she murmured, more to herself than to me. "He said the sea would keep us safe." "I know," I said, barely audible. She turned her head slightly, her silver hair catching the light. "And now you're letting it go." I swallowed hard. I don't have a choice. That was the lie I kept telling myself. I stepped outside after that, needing air. The sand felt damp under my bare feet, the tide slowly reaching up as if trying to pull me back in. The beach was empty, except for a few seagulls circling above, screaming into the wind. I sat on the old wooden steps of the porch, staring at the sea, that same endless blue that had witnessed every chapter of my life. I thought of my father teaching me to swim, holding my hand as I screamed when a wave knocked me over. I thought of Mom's laughter, of barbecues, of my little boy Ethan running down the shore years later, his footprints next to mine. And now, it was all going to belong to someone else. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't want to look, but I did. "Mark, you got the money yet? We need to settle the lawyer fees before next week." I sighed. My ex-husband had a way of making every word sound like a demand. I typed back a quick reply. "Me, yes, tomorrow. Please stop reminding me." The truth was uglier than I wanted to admit. I didn't sell the beach house because I wanted to. I sold it because I had to. Because life doesn't care about nostalgia. Debts pile up, bills suffocate you, and sometimes survival costs more than love. But how do you explain that to a mother who still believes in forever? When I went back inside, Mom was sitting at the dining table, her hands folded, staring at a family photograph. It was one of the old ones, me at 10 years old, Dad holding me up on his shoulders, the sea behind us shimmering gold in the sunset. I sat opposite her quietly. "Do you remember that day?" she asked, still looking at the picture. "Yeah," I whispered. "You burned the chicken that night." She chuckled softly, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Your father said it was the best meal he'd ever had." We both laughed, that kind of broken laugh that hides pain behind nostalgia. Then her tone changed. "Why didn't you tell me before?" I hesitated. I was afraid you'd talk me out of it. "You think I could stop you?" Her voice cracked. "I couldn't stop your father from dying, or you from leaving when you married that man. I can't stop anything anymore." "Mom." She waved her hand dismissively. "No, it's okay. Maybe it's time. Maybe the sea's tired of us too." I reached across the table and held her hand. Her skin was paper-thin, cold. I wanted to say something comforting, something that would make it all better, but my throat was tight. She squeezed my fingers gently and whispered, "Just promise me one thing, Lena. Don't forget how the ocean sounds, no matter where you go." That night I couldn't sleep. The wind was strong, whistling through the cracks in the window frames. I walked through the empty rooms, touching the walls, tracing the edges of old picture frames. Every corner of that house was alive with ghosts, my childhood laughter, my father's voice, my mother's lullabies. I ended up in my old room. The wallpaper was faded, the shelves still held dusty trophies and seashells. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, and whispered, "I'm sorry." In the dark, I heard the faint creak of the door. Mom stood there in her nightgown, holding a blanket. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. I shook my head. She came in slowly, sat beside me, and draped the blanket over my legs. For a moment, it felt like I was a child again. "You used to stay up all night before the first day of school," she said with a sad smile. "You said you were scared the world outside would forget you." I smiled faintly. Maybe I was right. She looked at me, really looked at me, with those eyes that had seen too much, loved too much, and lost too much. "You're not a bad person, Lena," she said quietly. "You're just tired." The tears came before I could stop them. "I didn't want to do this, Mom, I swear. But after Dad, after Mark left, after everything, I just can't keep holding on to things I can't afford anymore." Her hand rested gently on my hair. "Sometimes we think letting go will save us," she whispered, "but sometimes it's what destroys us." I buried my face in her lap, crying silently. She stroked my hair until I fell asleep. The next morning, she was already up when I woke. The smell of pancakes filled the air. I walked into the kitchen, eyes swollen, trying to act normal. She smiled like nothing had happened. "You still like them with blueberries?" I nodded, sitting down. "Always." For a few minutes, we ate in silence. The only sound was the gentle clink of forks and the rhythmic crash of waves outside. Then she said, "Your father used to say this house was our heartbeat. You stop hearing it, and you stop feeling alive." I looked up at her, my fork frozen midair. "Why are you saying that now?" She smiled faintly. "Because I think he'd want you to know it's okay. Houses don't make a home, people do." I didn't know it then, but that was her way of forgiving me. After breakfast, she went to the garden, tending to her small patch of flowers by the fence. I stood at the doorway, watching her move slowly, her body frail but graceful. Every petal she touched seemed to come alive. I wanted to memorize everything: the curve of her shoulders, the hum she always sang, the way the ocean breeze played with her hair. I knew deep down this was the last morning like this. Later that day, I packed our things. The real estate agent would come tomorrow. I labeled boxes with words that felt foreign: memories, kitchen, living room. I didn't even know where most of it would go. Mom came in holding an old photo album. "You missed this one," she said, placing it on the counter. I smiled faintly. I didn't forget, I just couldn't pack it. We sat together, flipping through the pages. Pictures of birthdays, fishing trips, Dad's crooked grin. When we reached the last page, she pointed at a photo of me standing in front of the house, barefoot, hair messy, holding a seashell. "You were 6, she said softly. "You told me you'd live here forever." I nodded. Forever didn't last very long. She closed the album gently. "It never does." Her words hung in the air, like a whisper from another lifetime. That night, as I looked out the window, the moonlight shimmered on the water, and the sea whispered its endless lullaby. I tried to convince myself that tomorrow would be a new beginning, that selling the house would give me peace. But deep down, I knew I wasn't just selling a house. I was selling the last piece of who we used to be. And as the tide crept higher, I could almost hear my father's voice in the wind, saying, "Don't forget her, Lena. She's the one who kept you safe when I couldn't." I turned away, tears burning my eyes, and whispered into the night, "I won't, Dad, I won't." But as the house groaned softly in the wind, I wasn't sure if I was making a promise or breaking one. The next morning, the air felt heavier. The ocean was calm, but I could feel the storm brewing inside me. I spent half the night awake, listening to the waves crash against the rocks, wondering if the sea could hear my guilt. Mom was already sitting on the porch when I stepped outside. She wore her old straw hat, the one she used to wear every summer when we built sandcastles together. She was holding a cup of tea, staring at the horizon as if she could see something I couldn't. "Morning," I said softly. She didn't look at me right away. "It's beautiful today, isn't it?" I followed her gaze. The ocean stretched endlessly, sunlight dancing on its surface like liquid glass. "Yeah," I said. Beautiful. She smiled faintly. You were 5 the first time you called it that. You said the sea sparkled just like Daddy's eyes. I felt my throat tighten. I remember. Her eyes glistened. Do you really? I nodded, but the truth was, I remembered too much. The smell of salt and sunscreen, Dad's laugh echoing through the wind, the sound of his footsteps on the deck at sunrise. Those memories lived in the walls of the beach house, in the floorboards that creaked under his weight. And now, they would belong to someone else. We spent that day sorting through old boxes. The living room looked like a museum of our family: photo albums, trinkets, seashells, half-burnt candles from birthdays long forgotten. Mom sat on the couch, holding an old record sleeve in her hands. Your father used to play this every Sunday morning, she said softly. Said music kept the soul young. I smiled, running my fingers over the vinyl. He used to dance with you in the kitchen. Her eyes lit up for a moment. Yes, you'd always laugh and say, you two look silly. I did remember, the way his hands wrapped around her waist, the way she pretended to be embarrassed but never pulled away. For a moment, the silence between us wasn't heavy. It was warm. Then she asked quietly, do you ever miss him? Every day, I said without hesitation. She looked at me, her voice trembling. Then, why does it feel like you're trying so hard to erase him? The question hit like a punch to the chest. Mom. I'm not angry, she interrupted, her tone gentle but firm. I wonder if selling this place isn't about money. Maybe it's about trying to forget. I didn't answer, because deep down she was right. That afternoon, I went for a walk along the shoreline. The wind tugged at my hair, the sand cold beneath my feet. I walked past the old pier where Dad used to take me fishing. I could still see his outline, strong, patient, teaching me how to cast a line. Hold it steady, sweetheart, he'd say, and wait. The sea only gives when it trusts you. The memory was so vivid I almost turned, expecting to see him standing there. But all I saw was the empty pier and the endless horizon. The house looked smaller from out here, a lonely figure against the vastness of the sea. When I came back, I saw Mom sitting by the window, a box of photographs in her lap. Her eyes were wet, but she smiled when she saw me. Look, she said, holding up a faded picture. Your father teaching you to swim, you were terrified. I took the photo, laughing softly through the ache in my chest. He threw me in. She chuckled. He said it was the only way you'd learn to float. And you screamed at him for an hour, I said. Her laughter faded into a sigh. He always said love was about trust. Maybe that's why he loved the sea so much. It tests you, but it never lies. That night, while Mom dozed off in her chair, I found myself wandering into Dad's old study. The smell of his cologne still lingered faintly in the air, cedarwood and tobacco. His desk was untouched, just like he left it the day he died. I ran my fingers over the dusty typewriter, the yellowed notepads, the framed photo of the three of us. My chest ached with the kind of longing that has no cure. I opened one of the drawers and found an old letter, unopened, addressed to my girls. The handwriting was unmistakable. My heart stopped. Hands trembling, I unfolded the paper and began to read. If you're reading this, it means I couldn't keep my promise to stay. But I want you both to know something. This house, this beach, every piece of it was built from love, not wood. When life gets heavy, come back here. Let the sea remind you who you are. I pressed the paper to my chest, tears slipping down my cheeks. I could hear Mom's soft breathing from the living room. She had fallen asleep. I tucked the letter back carefully, afraid it might crumble under the weight of my grief. That night, I dreamed of him, standing in the water, calling my name, his arms open. But every time I tried to reach him, the waves pulled me back. The next morning, Mom seemed different, quieter, distant, almost peaceful. She made tea and sat by the window again. Your father used to say goodbyes are easier when you've already let go, she said. I frowned. What's that supposed to mean? She smiled faintly. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. The real estate agent was supposed to come later that day to finalize the paperwork. I was supposed to feel relieved, a step closer to freedom. But instead, I felt like I was burying something alive. While Mom rested, I went up to the attic to finish packing. The air was thick with dust and old memories. I found boxes filled with seashells I collected as a kid, each one labeled with a date and location. I picked one up, August 1998, Dad's favorite shell. My vision blurred. I held it close, listening to the faint whisper inside. When I was little, I believed you could hear the sea inside a shell. Maybe that's why I kept so many. I didn't want to lose its voice. I sat there for what felt like hours, surrounded by forgotten pieces of our life. When I finally came downstairs, Mom was in the kitchen, peeling apples. The radio was playing one of Dad's old songs, the same one they used to dance to. I leaned against the doorway, watching her sway slightly to the rhythm. There was a softness in her movements, like she was dancing with someone only she could see. "Do you ever think about leaving?" I asked quietly. She turned, puzzled. "Leaving?" "Yeah, just walking away from everything, starting over somewhere new." She smiled wistfully. "Once maybe, when your father died, I thought about it, but then I realized you can't outrun memories. They follow you no matter how far you go." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Lena," she said, her tone gentle but sharp, "you're trying to save yourself by running, but what if the only way to be free is to stay?" Her words hit deeper than I wanted them to. I didn't respond. I just turned away, pretending to busy myself with boxes. Later that evening, a storm rolled in. The sky turned gray, thunder growling in the distance. The first drops of rain hit the windows like tears. Mom lit candles and turned off the lights. "It's just like the summer of '02, she said. "Remember the big storm?" I smiled faintly. "Yeah, Dad made us camp in the living room with flashlights." She laughed softly. "You were so scared of the thunder. He told you the sky was just clapping for the sea." The thunder cracked again, shaking the windows. Mom closed her eyes, humming to herself. I sat beside her, both of us lost in different timelines. For the first time in years, I saw her as more than my mother. I saw her as a woman who had loved deeply, lost completely, and yet somehow kept breathing. I realized then that selling the house wasn't just taking something from her. It was taking the last place where she could still be with him. When the storm passed, I found her asleep again, her head resting against the armchair, her hand clutching a photograph of Dad. I took it gently from her fingers and looked at it, their faces glowing with sunlight, laughter frozen in time. The sea roared softly outside, calmer now, as if it had said what it needed to say. I stood by the window, watching the tide pull back, and whispered to the night, "How do I let go of something that's already part of me?" The only answer was the sound of waves, endless, patient, forgiving. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard Mom's voice faintly through the walls. She was talking in her sleep again, her words drifting like whispers. "Don't go too far, Henry, the tide's coming in." My father's name. I pressed a pillow to my face and cried silently. Because no matter how far I ran, the sea, and everything it had taken, would always follow. And as the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, I realized something terrifying. It wasn't just the house that was fatting. It was her. It started with a knock on the door. 3 sharp knocks, firm, familiar, and unwelcome. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes, trying to drown the noise of my thoughts in the sound of running water. Mom was in her room, humming softly, folding clothes she'd probably never wear again. When I opened the door, he was standing there, Mark, my ex-husband, still in that same leather jacket, still wearing that expression that made him look half apologetic, half proud of the damage he caused. "Hey, Lena," he said, forcing a smile. "Didn't think I'd find you here." I froze. "What are you doing here?" He shrugged. "You weren't answering my calls." "I told you I'll send the money tomorrow. It's done. The house is sold." He looked past me into the living room, his eyes scanning the boxes stacked by the wall. "So it's true then?" He gave a short laugh. "Never thought you'd actually go through with it." I crossed my arms, feeling the weight of my exhaustion settle in. "You don't get to judge me, Mark, not after everything." He sighed, stepping inside without being invited. "I'm not here to fight. I just wanted to see if you're okay and maybe talk about Ethan." I stiffened. "What about him?" Mark hesitated, scratching the back of his neck. "He misses me. And, well, with your job situation and everything, I think maybe it's better if he stays with me for a while." I stared at him, disbelief turning into fury. "Are you serious? You lost the right to make that decision when you walked out on us." "Don't do this, Lena," he said quietly. "I'm trying to help." "Help?" My voice trembled. "You want to help by taking my son away?" Before he could answer, a soft voice interrupted us. "Who's there, sweetheart?" Mom appeared at the end of the hallway, holding onto the wall for support. Her eyes lit up when she saw him. "Mark, oh my goodness, it's been so long." He smiled politely. "Hi, Mrs. Green, you look wonderful." She beamed, oblivious to the tension in the air. "You two should come sit. I'll make tea." "No, Mom," I started, but she was already shuffling toward the kitchen, humming again. Mark gave me a look that said be civil, and I bit my tongue. We sat in silence while she prepared the tea. The sound of cups clinking felt deafening. Finally, she joined us, placing the tray on the table with shaky hands. "So, are you two getting along better now?" I forced a smile. "We're just talking, Mom." She looked between us, her eyes gentle, searching. "Good, life's too short for grudges." Mark nodded. "You're right, Mrs. Green." Then he turned to me. "Can we talk outside?" I followed him to the porch, arms crossed tightly around myself. He leaned against the railing, the ocean wind brushing his hair. "You look tired," he said. "Thanks," I muttered. "Always good to hear that from your ex." He smiled faintly. "Still the same Lena, always with the walls up. I learned from the best." That shut him up for a second, then he sighed. "Look, I didn't come here to fight about the past. I see what's happening. You're drowning, Lena. Selling the house, moving your mom, juggling bills, this isn't sustainable. Let me take Ethan for a bit. You need time." I clenched my fists. "You think I don't know I'm falling apart? You think I want to sell the last piece of my father? But I don't have the luxury of breaking down, Mark. I have to survive." He looked at me, something soft flickering in his eyes. "I never wanted it to get this bad." "Then maybe you shouldn't have left," I whispered. Silence. The waves filled the space between us like ghosts eavesdropping on our pain. When I went back inside, Mom was sitting quietly with her tea, staring at the window. "Everything okay?" she asked. I forced a smile. "Yeah, he's leaving." But she didn't seem convinced. "He still cares about you, you know." I sighed. "He cares about control, not people." Her gaze softened. "Sometimes we confuse control with love, especially when we're afraid to be alone." I didn't reply. She reached out and took my hand. "You don't have to be strong all the time, Lena." I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. Someone has to be. That evening, Mark left after making another attempt to reason with me. He promised to call about Ethan soon. I watched his car disappear down the road, feeling an odd mix of anger and emptiness. When I walked back into the house, I heard something faint, like muffled sobbing. It was Mom. She was in her bedroom, sitting on the edge of her bed, clutching a photo of Dad. I froze at the doorway. "Mom." She looked up quickly, wiping her eyes. "Oh, it's nothing, just dust in my eyes." I sat beside her. "You don't have to lie to me." She smiled weakly. I wish your father were here. He'd know what to say." "Yeah," I said quietly. "He always did." She turned to me, her voice trembling. "He built this house with his hands, Lena. Every beam, every nail. He said it would be our safe place forever." "I know, Mom." "So why does it feel like I failed him?" Her words shattered something inside me. "You didn't fail him," I whispered. "I did." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "I'm the one selling it. I'm the one taking away everything he left us." Her hand found mine. "You think your father measured love in walls and wood? No, he built this so we could be together. And as long as we have each other, he's still here." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But all I could think of was the bank accounts, the debts, the letters from lawyers. Reality doesn't bend for sentiment. Still, I smiled for her sake and said, "Maybe you're right." She patted my hand gently. "You'll understand one day, when you stop running." Later that night, I couldn't shake off her words. I stepped outside again, the moonlight reflecting off the sea like shards of glass. The waves rolled in slow and heavy, each one echoing the same question. "What are you doing, Lena?" I lit a cigarette, something I hadn't done in years. The first drag burned, but it felt grounding. Mark's voice replayed in my head. "You're drowning, Lena." Mom's voice followed. "Sometimes we confuse control with love." They were both right, and that realization scared me more than anything. I thought about Ethan, his laugh, his bright eyes, his innocence. He didn't know what was happening. I told him we were moving closer to the city. He didn't know we were losing everything that once held us together. A gust of wind blew the ash from my cigarette, scattering it into the night. For a moment, it looked like sparks flying out to sea. Then it was gone. The next morning, I woke to the sound of coughing. I rushed to Mom's room. She was sitting up, clutching her chest, breathing heavily. "Mom," I grabbed a glass of water, helping her sip. "You okay?" She nodded weakly. "Just a little dizzy, that's all." But I could see the truth in her pale face, the tremor in her hands. "We should go to the doctor," I said firmly. "No hospitals," she said quickly. "I just need rest." "Mom." I said no. Her tone sharpened, then softened. "Please, Lena, I don't want to spend my last days under fluorescent lights." I froze. "Last days, don't say that." She smiled sadly. "Everyone has to go sometime. Even the sea eventually fades." I shook my head. Not now." Her eyes filled with tears. "You can't protect me from time, sweetheart. Just promise me you'll forgive yourself when I'm gone." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. She took my silence as an answer and leaned back against the pillows, whispering, "Good girl." That night, after she'd fallen asleep, I sat in the living room alone, the glow of a single lamp lighting the boxes stacked high around me. The house felt smaller, emptier, like it already knew it was being abandoned. I looked around, the faded wallpaper, the clock that had stopped ticking months ago, the smell of the sea sneaking through the cracks in the windows. I thought about all the years that had led to this, every argument, every compromise, every heartbreak. I thought about the version of me that used to believe love could fix everything. That girl was gone now. But maybe, just maybe, something of her still lingered in these walls, waiting for me to remember who I used to be before life became a list of survival tactics. I stood up, walked to the front door, and stepped outside. The night was quiet, the stars scattered across the sky like tiny promises I no longer believed in. I whispered into the wind, "I'm trying, Dad, I really am." Somewhere deep in the distance, thunder rumbled again, low, like a heartbeat buried beneath the ocean. And for a brief moment, I thought I heard his voice in it. "Then keep trying, Lena. Even broken hearts can still love." It happened by accident. The kind of accident that changes everything you thought you knew. The next morning, the house was silent, the kind of silence that presses against your skin. Mom was still asleep, her breathing faint and uneven. I didn't want to wake her, so I wandered into the study, my father's old room, the one I'd been avoiding since we arrived. The air smelled of dust and sea salt. The curtains fluttered lightly with the breeze, scattering sunlight across the shelves. His books were still there, fishing guides, sea journals, old notebooks filled with numbers I never understood. Everything was frozen in time, as if he might walk in at any moment and scold me for touching his things. I started opening drawers, looking for papers to organize before the move. That's when I found it, a wooden box, tucked deep inside the bottom drawer. It was small, carved with the initials HEG, Henry Edward Green, my father. I sat on the floor and lifted the lid. Inside were letters, dozens of them, yellowed with age and tied together with a faded blue ribbon. My heart pounded. Each envelope was addressed in my father's handwriting, but one of them stood out, the ink darker, fresher somehow, addressed to Evelyn, my mother. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. "Evie," it began, "if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it back from the water. I know you told me not to go out alone that morning, but you know me, stubborn as the tide. If I don't come home, I need you to promise something. Take care of our girl. She's got your heart and she'll need your strength. The money from the insurance, the savings account, it's all in your name now. Don't tell her yet. Let her find her own way first. But if things ever get too hard, use it to help her." That's what it's for. I read the last line 3 times. Then I read it again. The money from the insurance. There was money. My father had left something. I looked up from the letter, my breath catching in my throat. Mom had never said anything about that, not once. Why? That question burned through my mind all morning. I waited until she woke up, sitting on the porch sipping her tea. The ocean stretched before her like an old friend she didn't want to say goodbye to. "Mom," I said carefully, holding the letter in my hand, "can I ask you something?" She glanced up, smiling weakly. "Of course, sweetheart." I sat beside her, the letter shaking slightly in my fingers. I was cleaning Dad's study, and I found this. Her smile faded as soon as she saw it. Her hand trembled when she reached for the paper. "Where did you get that?" she whispered. "In the bottom drawer. You kept it hidden." Her lips pressed together, eyes glistening. "You weren't supposed to see that." "Why not?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "He left money for us, didn't he? You never told me." Her shoulders sank. "Because it's gone, Lena." The words hit me like a wave. "Gone? What do you mean gone?" She looked out at the sea, her voice barely a whisper. "I used it." "For what?" She hesitated, then quietly, "For you." I frowned, confused. "For me?" She nodded. "Your college tuition, your apartment when you moved out, the lawyer when Mark left. Every time you thought I was helping with a little money here and there, it wasn't from savings, sweetheart. It was from him." My chest tightened. "You should have told me." She shook her head slowly. "No, your father didn't want you to grow up depending on ghosts. He wanted you to learn to stand on your own." I stood up, packing. "So all this time, you let me think we were broke. You let me sell the house." Her voice cracked. "We are broke now, Lena. I used everything I had left to keep you safe." "That wasn't your choice to make," I snapped. She looked up at me then, those same blue eyes that used to comfort me when I was small now filled with a grief so deep it scared me. "Maybe not, but mothers make choices, even the ones that hurt. Especially those." I turned away, my throat burning. "You should have told me the truth." "And what good would that have done?" she said softly. "You'd still be angry, but now you'd have guilt too." Her words cut through the air like knives. I wanted to yell, to scream, to accuse her of betrayal. But instead, I felt my anger melt into something far heavier, sorrow, because I understood, and that was worse. Hours passed without us speaking. She stayed in the living room, staring at the ocean, while I sat in the kitchen, replaying every memory with her, every argument, every sacrifice. All those times she'd given me money when I was struggling. The way she'd comforted me when I couldn't pay the rent, when I thought Ethan and I would end up homeless, and I never asked how she managed. She had spent everything, even what Dad left behind, just to keep me from breaking. And here I was, angry at her for losing a house, when she'd already lost everything else. I felt sick. That evening, the light outside turned golden, that soft, melancholy glow that makes everything look like a memory. I found her sitting on the porch again, wrapped in a shawl. I sat beside her silently, unsure how to begin. "I'm sorry," I finally said. She smiled faintly, not looking at me. "You don't have to be." "I do," I said, my voice trembling. "You gave up everything for me, and I blamed you for it." Her hand found mine, warm and fragile. "That's what mothers do, sweetheart. We give until there's nothing left, and sometimes even after that." I leaned against her shoulder, tears stinging my eyes. "I wish Dad were here." She sighed softly. "He is, every time you hear the waves, every time you make a hard choice. He's in that strength of yours, even when it hurts." We sat there for a long time, the sound of the sea filling the spaces between our breaths. And for the first time in years, it didn't feel like the ocean was stealing something from me. It felt like it was giving something back. Later that night, as she slept, I went back into the study. I opened the box again, sorting through the other letters. Most were short little notes from Dad about fishing trips, reminders, even jokes. But one caught my attention. It wasn't addressed to Mom, it was addressed to me. My hands trembled as I opened it. "My little sailor. If you ever feel lost, come back to the sea. It'll remind you where you come from. You have your mother's fire, and that's a beautiful thing, but don't let it burn down what you love. The world will try to take pieces of you, but promise me you'll never trade your heart for safety. Because love, real love, will hurt, but it will also save you. Love." "Dad." The tears came fast and heavy. I pressed the letter against my chest, as if I could somehow feel his heartbeat through the paper. I whispered, "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm trying, I really am." The next morning, Mom was different again, softer, quieter. She seemed lighter, as if some invisible weight had been lifted from her. She was sitting in her chair by the window, sunlight on her face, her hair glowing like silver threads. "I found his letter to me," I said, holding it gently. She smiled faintly. "He always knew you'd need it one day." I nodded, blinking back tears. "You should have told me everything sooner." She looked out toward the sea. If I had, would you have listened? I opened my mouth to answer, then closed it, because we both knew the truth I wouldn't have. I thought I was saving us, I said quietly. She reached out and touched my cheek. Sometimes saving isn't about holding on, Lena. It's about knowing when to let go. Her hand lingered there, trembling. You're so much like him, she whispered. Stubborn, brave, always looking for control in the middle of chaos. I get that from both of you, I said with a shaky laugh. She smiled, then maybe we did something right. That afternoon, I made her lunch, soup and toast, the way she liked it. She only ate a little, saying she wasn't hungry. She looked tired, her eyelids heavy, but peaceful somehow. Before she went to lie down, she stopped by the door and turned to me. Lena. Yeah. Promise me something. Anything. When I'm gone, don't spend your life trying to make things right, just live. That's enough. I froze, my throat tightening. Don't say that, Mom. She smiled gently. The sea takes what it loves, sweetheart, but it always gives back a piece of it to the ones who listen. Then she went to her room, leaving me standing there, heart pounding, trying to hold on to every word. That night, the house was silent again. I sat alone in the living room, the letters spread across the table, surrounded by memories. Outside, the waves whispered against the shore. And for the first time, I understood what my father meant. The sea doesn't take, it teaches. It teaches you how to lose without forgetting, how to love without owning. I looked toward my mother's room, where her lamp still glowed faintly. And I whispered into the darkness, I'm listening now. The day before we were supposed to leave, the sky turned gray. The kind of gray that looks heavy enough to collapse. The wind was colder too, sweeping through the cracks in the house and carrying with it the faint scent of rain. Mom woke early, dressed in her soft blue cardigan and white slippers, the same ones she'd worn every morning since we arrived. She looked fragile, smaller somehow, like a piece of glass that had been handled too many times. I made her tea, and we sat together at the kitchen table, the silence thick between us. She smiled at me faintly. It's really happening, isn't it? I nodded. Tomorrow morning. She looked down at her hands. Your father used to say storms always come before change. Maybe that's a sign. I stared out the window. The ocean was restless, the waves crashing harder, foam spraying against the rocks. Maybe, I whispered. We didn't say much after that. The rest of the morning was spent packing the last few boxes. Every sound, the closing of drawers, the rustle of paper, the clinking of dishes felt final, like a heartbeat fatting. At one point, I found Mom standing in the hallway, holding my father's fishing hat. She ran her fingers over the brim, her lips trembling. I kept this, she said softly, because it still smells like him. I didn't know what to say, so I just wrapped my arms around her. By noon, it began to rain. Not a heavy downpour, just a steady, patient drizzle. The kind that soaks you before you even realize it. Mom insisted on sitting by the window, watching the rain slide down the glass. It's beautiful, she whispered. Everything looks softer when it rains. I pulled a blanket over her shoulders. You should rest, Mom. You look tired. I'm fine, she said with that stubborn tone I knew too well. Then she looked up at me, her eyes glimmering. Do you remember the last time it rained like this? I smiled faintly. You mean the time I got lost on the beach? She laughed, a real laugh, shaky but pure. Yes, you were 7. You ran off chasing that dog, and when you finally came back, you were covered in mud. I laughed too, even though it hurt. Dad was furious. Furious, yes, she said, smiling. But when he saw your face, he couldn't stay mad. You were crying so hard he just picked you up and carried you home in the rain. The memory warmed the air between us, and for a moment, the house didn't feel so empty. That evening, I decided to cook dinner, one last meal in the home that raised me. I made her favorite, baked fish, mashed potatoes, and green beans with lemon. While I cooked, I could hear her humming from the living room, the same tune she used to sing when I was a child. The sound drifted through the house like a memory that refused to fade. When the food was ready, I called her to the table. She smiled when she saw the dishes. You remembered. Of course I did. We ate slowly, quietly, savoring every bite like it was sacred. The rain outside grew heavier, beating against the roof in rhythm with our breathing. At one point, she set down her fork and said softly, "This might be the best meal I've ever had." I laughed. "You say that every time." "I mean it this time," she said, her eyes gleaming with something deeper, something final. I looked at her, trying to memorize every detail. The wrinkles around her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly when she reached for her glass, the warmth that still lived in her smile despite everything she'd lost. And in that moment, I realized that no amount of money, no amount of survival was worth losing this. After dinner, I made us tea. She sat in her armchair by the window, wrapped in her shawl, while I sat on the floor beside her, resting my head against her knee like I used to when I was little. The storm outside had grown louder. Thunder rolled in the distance, and lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the waves crashing against the shore. She stroked my hair gently. "Your father loved nights like this," she murmured. "He said the storm reminded him that the sea was alive." I smiled weakly. "You always hated them." She chuckled softly. "I did, but I loved how calm he became during them. He said chaos was just another kind of peace." We sat there listening to the rain, neither of us speaking for a long time. The candle on the table flickered, casting soft shadows across her face. "Mom," I said finally, "do you ever wish things had been different?" She tilted her head slightly. "Different how?" "I don't know," I said. "Maybe if Dad hadn't died, if you didn't have to do everything alone, if I'd made better choices." She smiled sadly. "We all wish for different lives sometimes, but I think we end up where we're meant to be, even if it hurts getting there." Tears welled in my eyes. "I don't know if I believe that." She cupped my cheek gently. "That's okay, you don't have to believe it yet." After a while, she asked me to get the small wooden box from the cabinet. When I brought it to her, she opened it slowly. Inside was my father's watch, the old silver one he wore every day. "He wanted you to have this," she said softly, pressing it into my hand. I looked at it, the metal cold against my skin. "He wore this the day he died." She nodded. "He never took it off. He said it helped him remember how precious time was." I turned it over, running my thumb across the back. There was an engraving, E+H, always the sea. I swallowed hard. "I can't take this." "You can," she said. "You should. You've been running from the past for so long, Lena. Maybe this will remind you that some things are worth holding on to." I fastened it around my wrist, my eyes stinging. "Thank you, Mom." She smiled, her eyes glassy with tears. "He'd be proud of you, you know." I shook my head. "I've done nothing to be proud of." Her hand squeezed mine. "You survived, that's enough." The rain began to ease around midnight. The thunder faded, leaving only the rhythmic whisper of waves. Mom had fallen asleep in her chair, her head tilted to one side, her breathing soft and uneven. I covered her with a blanket and sat across from her, just watching her. Every now and then, she'd murmur something in her sleep, sometimes my name, sometimes Dad. The house was filled with that strange kind of silence that feels alive, like it's breathing with you, remembering with you. I looked around at the boxes stacked by the door, at the empty shelves, the bare walls. Tomorrow, it would all be gone. Someone else's furniture, someone else's laughter. I wanted to hate the people buying it. I wanted to curse the world for forcing me to choose between love and survival. But instead, I just felt tired. I sat there until the candle burned low, listening to the sea whisper outside, feeling the pulse of the watch on my wrist ticking softly, steadily. Sometime later, I don't know when, I must have dozed off. I woke to silence. The rain had stopped completely. The air was still. The house felt colder. Mom was still in her chair, her face turned slightly toward the window. The blanket had slipped to the floor. "Mom," I said softly. She didn't move. I stood up, my heart beginning to pound. "Mom," I said louder, stepping closer. Her eyes were closed. Her lips were slightly parted, peaceful. Her hands were resting on her lap. "Mom," my voice broke. I touched her shoulder. Her skin was cool, too cool. I fell to my knees beside her, shaking her gently. "Mom, wake up, please wake up." But she didn't. The watch on my wrist ticked steadily, cruelly. Each second felt like a lifetime. I buried my face against her hands, sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. Outside, the ocean was calm again, the storm gone, leaving only silence. And I realized she had gone with it. I don't remember how long I stayed there. Minutes, hours, maybe forever. When the sun began to rise, its light poured through the window, painting her face in gold. She looked peaceful, as if she'd simply fallen asleep and drifted into the same sea my father once promised would keep us safe. On the table beside her was a small envelope, her handwriting neat and delicate. It said, "For Lena." My hands trembled as I opened it. "My darling girl. If you're reading this, I've gone home. Don't be sad I waited for this moment. I needed to see you forgive yourself before I left. You've spent your whole life saving others, but you never let anyone save you. It's time you did. Don't live in the past, sweetheart. Live enough for both of us. And whenever you feel lost, listen to the sea. I'll be there. Love. Mom." The ink was smudged, as if she'd cried while writing it. I pressed it to my chest and wept until the sun climbed high. The ocean outside shimmered, endless, eternal. And for the first time, I didn't hear its anger. I heard her voice in its rhythm, soft and steady, saying goodbye. Morning crept in quietly, almost ashamed to arrive. The house was still, too still, the kind of silence that no sound can fill. I sat there on the floor beside her, my knees pulled to my chest, her letter still clutched in my hand. The sunlight spilled through the window, soft and golden, brushing against her face. She looked like she was only sleeping, her lips slightly parted, the faintest smile on them. But I knew. I knew she was gone. The air smelled like rain and salt, and the ocean outside was unnervingly calm, as if it had already said its goodbyes. For a long time, I couldn't move. My body felt hollow, my mind heavy with memories that didn't belong to the present anymore. The watch on my wrist ticked softly. The second hand stopped for a heartbeat, then started again. And that's when I noticed the time, 2:47 a.m. I checked the clock on the wall. It had stopped too, the same time. It took me a moment to understand, the exact moment she must have left. I finally called the doctor, then the funeral home. The voices on the phone were calm, professional, detached. Words like natural causes and peaceful passing floated through the receiver like smoke. But none of those words meant anything. Nothing could describe what it felt like to lose her, to lose the only person who still knew how to love me without condition. When the men came to take her away, I followed them to the door, my hands trembling. I couldn't let go of her fingers. They were already cold. "Ma'am," one of them said gently, "we'll take good care of her." I nodded numbly, but as they lifted her onto the stretcher, I whispered, "Wait." They paused. I leaned down, pressing my forehead to hers. "I love you," I whispered. I should have said it more. Then they took her away. The door closed, and for the first time in my life, the house felt truly empty. I spent the rest of the day wandering through the rooms, touching everything she'd touched. The mug she drank from, the shawl she'd left on the chair, the book she'd never finished. Every object felt sacred now, like a relic. The realtor was supposed to come that afternoon, but I called and canceled. I couldn't bear the thought of strangers walking through these rooms, measuring square footage while my mother's voice still echoed in the walls. Outside, the sky cleared. The sea was calm, blue, and endless, as if nothing had happened. I walked down to the shore barefoot. The sand was cool, damp from the night's rain. The tide was low, leaving behind seashells and seaweed tangled in patterns that looked like writing, a language only the ocean could understand. The wind carried the faint scent of her perfume, lavender and sea salt. I closed my eyes, and for a second, I could almost feel her standing beside me. "You did good, sweetheart," I imagined her saying. "You kept your promise." But I hadn't kept anything. I'd broken every one of them. When I went back inside, I noticed her letter again on the table. I picked it up and reread it. Every line sank deeper the second time. "I needed to see you forgive yourself before I left." I hadn't, not really. I wandered into her room, sat on her bed, and stared at the half-packed boxes in the corner. The one labeled Memories was still open. Inside were photo albums, her wedding ring, Dad's fishing hat, and a small envelope I hadn't seen before. It had my name written in her handwriting, shakier this time. I opened it carefully. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a key. The note read, "Check the drawer in the old wardrobe. Bottom left, there's something I never told you." My heart started pounding. I crossed the room, opened the wardrobe, and found a hidden compartment under a false panel. Inside was a small tin box. The key fit perfectly. Inside there were papers, bank statements, letters, and a single check. My eyes widened when I saw the amount. It was large, very large. There was a short note attached. "Your father's policy. I couldn't bring myself to use it all. I wanted you to have the rest for your future, for Ethan. Promise me you won't waste it trying to fix the past." Tears spilled down my cheeks. Even after everything, she'd still been thinking of me. Even in her last days, she was still saving me from myself. I pressed the box against my heart and whispered, "You never stopped taking care of me, did you?" The funeral was small. Just a handful of people, a few neighbors, one of her old friends from church, and me. The church overlooked the sea, and as the pastor spoke, I kept watching the horizon. The waves glimmered under the sunlight, steady and eternal. When it was my turn to speak, I stood there holding the folded letter she'd left for me. My voice shook, but I read aloud anyway. She told me not to spend my life trying to make things right, just to live. My voice broke, and I looked out at the crowd, then at the casket, and whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom, for taking so long to understand what love really means." When it was over, I took a handful of her favorite flowers, white lilies, and walked down to the shore. I scattered them into the waves, watching as the water carried them away. For a moment, the sunlight hit just right, and the petals shimmered like tiny boats sailing home. Days passed, maybe weeks. Time felt elastic, stretching and snapping back in unpredictable ways. Ethan came to stay with me after the funeral. His laughter filled the house again, even if only for a while. He ran down the beach just like I used to, chasing the tide, his footprints erasing mine. At night, after he fell asleep, I'd sit by the window and listen to the sea. Sometimes, I thought I could hear her voice in it, humming softly, the same lullaby she used to sing when I was little. I started talking to her then, not out loud, but in my mind. Telling her about my day, about Ethan, about how I was trying to be brave. And somehow, it helped. A few weeks later, the realtor called again. "Ms. Green," she said gently, "we still have the buyer ready if you want to proceed. But if you need more time." I looked around the house. The boxes were still stacked by the wall, but now they felt lighter. The silence wasn't as sharp anymore. "I'll sign the papers," I said softly. When she came over, I didn't cry this time. I signed every page, every initial, every acknowledgement. When I was done, she shook my hand and said, "You're doing the right thing." But as I watched her leave, I wasn't sure if there even was a right thing anymore, only what was left. That night, I packed the last of my things. The ocean breeze slipped through the open windows, carrying the faint smell of rain again. Before I turned off the lights, I walked through every room one last time. The walls seemed to whisper with echoes, laughter, footsteps, the sound of my father's voice calling from the porch, my mother's humming drifting through the kitchen. When I reached the living room, I stopped by her chair. The blanket was still folded neatly on the armrest. I touched it gently, then whispered, "I'm leaving tomorrow, Mom." And for a moment, I swear, I felt a warm breeze brush against my cheek, like an answer. The next morning, I stood outside the house, suitcase by my side. The air was cool and bright, the sea stretching endlessly ahead. I turned to look at the house one last time, the peeling white paint, the creaking porch, the window where Mom used to sit. It looked tired, but it also looked at peace. I reached up to touch the watch on my wrist. The time still read 2:47. I hadn't changed the battery. Somehow, I didn't want to. As the wind picked up, I whispered, "I'll come back someday, I promise." Then I got in the car and drove away. In the rearview mirror, the house grew smaller and smaller, until it disappeared completely behind the dunes. But even as the road curved inland and the ocean vanished from sight, I could still hear it faintly, softly, like a heartbeat. The sea calling me home. It had been 6 months since the house was sold. 6 months since I watched the sea fade from my rearview mirror. 6 months since I whispered my last goodbye. And yet, not a single day passed when I didn't hear the sound of waves in my dreams. Life in the city was supposed to be easier, cleaner, faster. I rented a small apartment for Ethan and me, 2 bedrooms, beige walls, a balcony that overlooked a parking lot instead of an ocean. People came and went. Cars honked. The world moved, but I didn't. I went to work, I cooked, I smiled when I needed to, but inside I was still standing on that porch, watching my mother sleep for the last time. Grief is strange like that. It doesn't leave. It just learns how to hide in quieter corners. Ethan seemed to adjust faster. Kids do. He started school, made friends, learned to live without asking about grandma. But sometimes, when he'd draw pictures of houses and waves, I'd see her there, a tiny woman with silver hair standing by the sea. And I knew she hadn't left him either. One evening, I came home late from work. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Ethan was already asleep. His drawing from that day lay on the table, a picture of the three of us. Me, him, and the beach. I sat down, running my fingers over the crayon strokes. The ocean, the sun, a small white house. And then I saw it in the corner, drawn in shaky blue lines, a figure sitting by a window, smiling. Grandma, he'd written underneath. My throat tightened. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, fighting the ache that had been building in me for months. I couldn't keep pretending I'd moved on. The next morning, I packed a small bag, took her ashes from the drawer where I'd kept them hidden, and told Ethan we were going to visit Grandma's beach. He smiled. Will she be there? I swallowed hard. In her own way, I said softly. The drive felt longer this time. The road seemed narrower, the sky wider. Every mile closer felt like peeling off a layer of something I'd built to protect myself. When we finally reached the coast, the sight took my breath away. The sea stretched endlessly, glittering under the sun like nothing had changed, as if time itself bent around this place. The dunes still swayed with tall grass. The wind still carried that familiar salt. But the house was gone. In its place stood a modern glass structure, polished, silent, beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. The porch was gone, the fence, the window seat, all of it erased. For a long time, I just stood there, gripping the urn against my chest. "Mom," I whispered, "they took it all." But then I heard the waves, soft, steady, unchanged. And I remembered what she'd said, the sea takes what it loves, but it always gives something back. So I walked down to the water's edge. Ethan ran ahead of me, laughing, the wind tangling his hair. He stopped at the shore and pointed at the waves. "Look, Mom, they're saying hi." I smiled through my tears. "Yeah, baby, they are." I knelt in the sand, setting the urn down gently. The wind picked up, swirling around us. For a moment, the air smelled like lavender. I unscrewed the lid slowly, my hands trembling. The ashes inside were pale gray, soft as dust, lighter than air. Ethan watched quietly, his eyes wide but calm. "Are we giving her back to the sea?" "Yes," I said, "that's where she belongs." He nodded solemnly. "Will she be happy there?" I smiled, tears spilling down my cheeks. "She already is." I tilted the urn and let the wind take her. The ashes lifted, swirling into the air like silver smoke, dancing against the sunlight before falling gently into the waves. For a moment, it felt like time stopped. The sea shimmered brighter. The breeze wrapped around me, warm and soft like an embrace. And I could hear her, faintly, clearly, humming that same lullaby she used to sing when I was little. The one about the tide coming home. I stayed there long after Ethan ran off to collect seashells. The waves came and went, erasing my footprints, rewriting the sand over and over again. I remembered what my father had written in his letter. The sea only gives when it trusts you. Maybe that's what love was too, giving when it's hardest, trusting that it means something, even when it hurts. I reached down and touched the water. It was cold at first, then warmer as it soaked through my skin. For the first time since she died, I didn't feel like I was drowning. I felt forgiven. As the sun began to set, Ethan ran back to me, his hands full of shells. "Look, I found one for Grandma." He handed me a small spiral shell, pink and white. I held it to my ear out of instinct. And there it was, the sound of the sea, the heartbeat of everything I'd ever lost and loved. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you." We stayed to watch the sunset. The sky turned orange, then pink, then deep violet, the same colors I remembered from the summers of my childhood. The waves shimmered like molten glass. Ethan fell asleep on my lap, his small hand clutching the shell. I wrapped my arm around him, watching the horizon fade. And for the first time, I spoke out loud to her, to Dad, to the sea. "I get it now," I whispered. "You weren't trying to make me hold on, you were teaching me how to let go." A tear slid down my cheek, but I smiled. "You did good, Mom, you both did." The wind picked up again, brushing against my face like a kiss. The tide crept closer, reaching our feet. The world felt infinite, fragile, and eternal all at once. And somewhere between the crashing of waves and the whisper of wind, I heard her voice again, soft and certain. "You're home now, sweetheart." Weeks later, I went back to the city, but something in me had changed. I started painting again, something I hadn't done since I was a teenager. Not portraits, not people, just waves. Endless waves. Every stroke felt like breathing again. I hung one of the paintings above our kitchen table. Ethan looked at it one morning and said, "That's Grandma's ocean." "Yes," I said, "it is." He smiled. "Can we go back one day?" I kissed his forehead. "We will." A few months after that, I got a letter in the mail from the new owners of the beach house. It was polite, formal. They'd found something during their renovations, a small wooden box buried near the garden fence, engraved with the initials EG. They said they thought it might belong to me. When the package arrived, I opened it slowly. Inside was a folded note, my mother's handwriting, delicate but steady. "If you found this, then you came back, and that's enough. Don't spend your life chasing the past, Lena. Let the sea carry what it must. Just promise me you'll live, and when the waves call your name, listen." I laughed through the tears. Inside the box, next to the letter, was one last seashell, perfectly white, smooth as glass. When I held it to my ear, the sound of the sea filled the room. But this time, it didn't sound like sorrow. It sounded like home. Sometimes, at night, when the city is too loud, I put the shell on the windowsill and close my eyes. The waves hum softly through the walls, blending with the faint tick of my father's watch, still frozen at 2:47. It doesn't bother me anymore that it stopped. Maybe it stopped because time isn't supposed to move where love still lives. Maybe it stopped because that was the moment everything I thought I'd lost finally found its way back to me. I still dream of the beach, of the house, of her. In my dreams, she's sitting on the porch again, wrapped in her shawl, smiling at me. The sea glows behind her, endless and bright. I walk toward her barefoot, the sand warm beneath my feet. When I reach her, she stands, takes my hand and says, "You made it, sweetheart. You finally came home." And I always answer the same way. "I never really left, Mom." Then we stand there together, watching the waves roll in, two souls waiting for the tide, listening to the heartbeat of the world. Maybe the house was never ours to keep. Maybe it was only ever meant to teach me how to let go. But sometimes, when I close my eyes and listen close enough, I still hear her voice in the waves, soft, steady, eternal, calling me home,